Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm gratified that so many of you saw fit to share a little bit of your very precious time with me this evening, and I certainly hope that what I have to say, however unpleasant, and it will be unpleasant, will reward your investment of time. To set the stage, I think it would be a good idea to rehearse a couple of very important considerations regarding the nature of the administration which currently infests the White House. Just over the weekend, there was a summit of leaders from the NATO alliance. With no exception that I can think of, every single one of them was a socialist. Prime Minister Massimo D'Alema of Italy was on hand. Gerhard Schroeder from Germany. Tony Blair, of course, from Great Britain. Prime Minister Wim Kok from Holland. And, of course, Bill Clinton. There was a meeting held in conjunction with the NATO summit of the Democratic Leadership Council, which is the organization that produced Bill Clinton. At that meeting, Prime Minister D'Alema of Italy said the following: "There are words that in your civilization, in your history, sound difficult to understand or to accept. For example," he continued, "we belong to the Socialist International, and I'm aware that this word is somewhat sensitive here, and I can see that we have avoided pronouncing this word here, but we should prevail over this fear of words." Now, Mr. D'Alema's candor did not sit well with Bill Clinton, who avoids candor when at all possible. And Mr. Clinton leapt to his feet and said, "I'm not sure I would have you here, Massimo, if I were running for re-election." Duplicity, deception, and cover-up are innate in Mr. Clinton's makeup. Indeed, they are innate to the leadership elite that he represents. But let there be no misunderstanding here about the nature of the ideological convictions which animate Mr. Clinton and which animate the people who surround him. Those convictions are socialist convictions. They were adumbrated by Marx and Engels in the manifesto of the Communist Party a little over 150 years ago. That's something that we should bear in mind. A significant element of what we will describe tonight has its roots in ideological perversity, but there is something more sinister at work than merely misplaced idealism. Speaking of misplacing things, the Times of London reported just a little while ago, and I quote, "A new and wholly unexpected threat to world security cropped up briefly during this weekend's NATO summit when President Clinton dashed off from a meeting and forgot to take with him the nuclear football, a briefcase containing secret electronic launch codes for U.S. nuclear missiles. The football, a communications link with the Pentagon authorizing the use of nuclear weapons, is carried by and chained to a military aide who is supposed to remain just feet from the president whenever he leaves the White House, excepting, of course, those times when he wants to be alone with the likes of Monica Lewinsky, I would assume. But on Saturday, Mr. Clinton ended his International Trade Center meeting and sped off in his motorcade, leaving behind the most dangerous handbag in the world." Mr. Clinton is in the habit of misplacing very important things, as we will discuss in just a minute, such as, for instance, cruise missiles, which play into the Chinagate equation in a way that I will describe briefly. Obviously, Mr. Clinton is somebody who needs constant adult supervision, and that is something that presents a very interesting state of affairs for our country. Chinagate, digested to its essence, is treason and bribery, which is to say bribery in order to impel people who have been entrusted with our national security to commit acts of treason by betraying some of our most crucial defense secrets into the hands of a confirmed and determined foreign adversary, specifically Red China. Red China consists of a regime. We're not talking here about the subjects of the regime, we're talking about the rulers. We're talking about the criminal clique that presides over more than 1/5 of the human population, 1.2 billion souls, each of whom is as real and as vivid as each of us. They have the same dreams, they have the same desires. They were created by the same God. They were entitled to the same blessings of freedom. In the remarks that I'm going to share with you this evening, do not mistake me. Do not make the mistake of believing that I am trying to engender animosity toward the victims of that regime, because I am not. That is not my intention. I'm talking here about a criminal elite that uses means spanning the spectrum of coercion and corruption to accomplish their ends. What are those ends? About 5 years ago, Mo Zhuxiang, who was a highly positioned official in the hierarchy of the Communist Party of China, was asked by a Republican member of a Republican congressional delegation if the objective of the Chinese Communist Party was still world communism. Of course, replied this official, that is why we exist. The Chinese Communist Party has no meaningful existence apart from the promotion of world socialism. They preside over a slave empire and a military-industrial complex devoted to the expansion of that malignant idea. It is neither, in my opinion, arrogance nor hubris to say that we cannot be conquered by a foreign enemy unless we are first betrayed by enemies within our borders. I do not believe that Red China presents a military threat to the United States of significant magnitude that it could present us with an ultimatum at present. I believe that the fecundity of human freedom is such that when applied to matters of national defense as opposed to empire, we can protect ourselves from any conceivable foreign adversary, including the Red Chinese. However, if we find ourselves in a position where we are compromised from within, our national security can be fatally disrupted. And we can find ourselves in a position where we will have to accept a dictated accommodation with an insurgent China. And that is the possibility against which I wish to warn you this evening, and which I wish that you would warn your friends and acquaintances about in the coming weeks and months. We would not be the first country to be so betrayed by a perfidious ruling elite. As was mentioned in my introduction, my son is named William Wallace. Grigg, as it happens, is a name of Scottish provenance, and I am something of a student of Scottish history. One of my favorite poems by the great Scottish poet of patriotism, Robert Burns, is entitled "Such a Parcel of Rogues in a Nation." And this was written to lament Scotland's loss of independence, when it was not conquered on the battlefield, but rather conquered through the machinations of a treasonous elite in the top ranks of its government. Just to quote briefly here, I think this entirely applies to what's happening now with respect to Chinagate. What force or guile could not subdue through many warlike ages is wrought now by a coward few for hireling traitors' wages. The English steel we could disdain, secure in valor's station, but English gold has been our bane, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. We're bought and sold for English gold, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. I propose this evening to illustrate how we've been bought and sold for Beijing's gold by a parcel of rogues within our own nation. How much gold are we talking about? Well, in this era of huge and almost unfathomable national deficits, we're talking about relatively insignificant sums. But then again, it doesn't take a whole lot of money if you're dealing with somebody who's willing to sell his soul in a buyer's market, as Bill Clinton has demonstrated he is capable of doing. Sun Tzu is the Chinese sage of military and strategic tactics and theory of warfare and things of that nature. The Art of War was written about 2,500 years ago. And Sun Tzu's insights, as I will illustrate this evening, tend to guide the ruling elite in Red China today, and they're eminently worthy of inspection by those of us who want to understand the objectives of Beijing. Sun Tzu wrote that a wise military leader will gladly invest, and I quote, a few hundred pieces of gold to purchase critical intelligence and to buy off people who are in a position to help advance the cause that the military strategist is seeking to accomplish. And Mr. Clinton, of course, was willing to put much of our national security on sale in order to achieve his own personal political ambitions. A short while ago, Premier Zhu Rongji of the Red Chinese government gave a joint press conference in the White House with Bill Clinton. And the subject of the allegations that Red China had infiltrated the American electoral process through the medium of illegal campaign contributions to Bill Clinton was a topic of discussion at this joint press conference. Zhu Rongji is an individual possessed of a certain wit. This is what he had to say in response to the allegations that Red China bribed the President of the United States, and I quote, On the allegation of political contributions or campaign financing, I can also state in a very responsible manner that neither I nor President Jiang Zemin know anything about that. That, by the way, is something that we call in journalism a non-denial. He's saying, I don't know. He's not saying that we have discovered that this hasn't taken place. He's not rebutting the allegation. He's just saying, I have no knowledge of this. To continue. And we, too, also once asked the senior military leaders in China, and they told us they didn't have any knowledge of that. I think this shows that some Americans really had underestimated us. If the political contribution were to be really that effective, then now I have $146 billion of U.S. foreign exchange reserved, so I should have put out at least $10 billion U.S. for that purpose. Why just $300,000? That would be too foolish. Well, we don't know the exact amounts. The exact amounts tally somewhere in the millions of dollars. But it's interesting here that he attempts to deflect the accusation by saying we're dealing with relatively paltry sums. Once again, Sun Tzu said, only a few pieces of gold would be necessary in order to purchase critical intelligence. And so the question is not whether the Chinese managed to get, if you will, a rather large bang for the buck, but whether the bucks came from Beijing. That's the real question. And that's a question Mr. Zhu did not want to answer. Now, in dealing with the Clinton administration, we have to confront one of the most dismal realities of politics, which is that the same personality type you find in organized crime sometimes is found in organized politics, which is entirely logical because politics is all about controlling the power of the state. The business of the state is pushing people around and taking their property when it's not, of course, confined to its proper role, which is protecting their rights, protecting the property of the law-abiding.